Hello everybody, we are back with another Modern Tokens video. We're going to be going through another competitive league today and going through a little bit differently this time. So War of the Spark just came out, and as with every new set, obviously there's usually cards people want to talk about in terms of their viability in not just Modern but in our Tokens deck. And there was a lot of kind of mediocre ones this time, so I decided to do things a little bit differently and just kind of jammed them all into a deck. I don't think these are necessarily all playable or even worth it or good, but part of what I like doing this video series is testing out new cards for our deck so that you guys don't have to do quite as much testing with not good cards, and we can all kind of learn from these experiences together. So I went ahead and just picked a handful of cards, mostly some one-ofs, just figured to try them out, and obviously we had the hope to draw them, but I also didn't want to just completely ruin the deck by throwing a bunch of cards that I think are just less optimal. We are still mostly a competitive series here. I'm trying to make this deck competitive, so I figured I would try to do just that, try some testing new cards and make it competitive. I guess what we can do is start with the probably most talked about card, not just in our group, but in standard, or one of the more talked about cards in standard for this set is Dreadhorde Invasion. This is certainly not Bitter Blossom. It obviously is a 1 in a black enchantment that puts 1/1 worth of stats onto the battlefield and costs you 1 life every turn. So I think this card is good in standard, very good in limited, and I think it is probably not good in modern. Certainly in our deck, or as I should say, almost certainly it's worse than Bitter Blossom in every single way. In our deck especially, it even more so. Obviously the tokens it makes is a ground creature, and obviously it doesn't go wide, which is what we're looking for with Virtue and Gideons and Swords and all that stuff. It actually just grows tall. The only upside that I can think of is that last little lifelink clause. But if you have let this go for 6 turns and have a 6/6 creature on the board, first of all, it's highly unlikely. Second of all, it just makes it much more prone to killing. And yeah, you can gain the life back, and that's fine. And if you do that, great. But also, if you had 6 tokens out with Bitter Blossom, you'd probably be in better shape anyway. So that's the only potential upside that I have, and I don't think that's even really worth mentioning in modern. It will be a player in standard when you can actually have multiple amass cards and you can get a 6/6 by the third probably by the 4th turn. Then it becomes more relevant, assistant lifelink, but in this deck it's not a thing. So the only really way that you'd play this is kind of like as like a 5th Bitter Blossom if you really wanted to. I don't see there's any reason that you would split 2 and 2 or anything like that. However, what I did do is I went 3 and 2, and this is really just for the fact of I wanted to potentially draw this card. I want to be able to see it. I want us to be able to just see how it plays out in this deck. And I didn't really want to go 4 and 2. So I just played it as my 4th and 5th Bitter Blossom. But in all reality, in any competitiveness, even if this card ends up being like a playable addition to this card, and those are the kinds of effects, or these Bitter Blossom effects is all we're looking for in modern based on the metagame, it would be after your 4 Bitter Blossoms, I think. But like I said, just trying to because we want to do it. Now on to a card that I do think has some real viability in modern, potentially in this deck, and that is Gideon Blackblade. 3 mana Gideon, 3 mana Planeswalker, always something that you want to take a look at. Non-activated ability, constant static ability. It is a 4/4 creature on your turn with indestructible. So that obviously makes him prone to being path to exiled or similar in modern, because you can't choose to not activate like you would with Gideon Ally as Zendikar. Obviously, against a controlling opponent, you would just zero this and zero this and zero this and zero this and get your value that way, and then really only plus it to attack if you needed to. This at all times can be path to exiled. However, you do get to also +1 him or -1, that's the case, but uses activated ability in addition to also being a 4/4, being able to attack with a 4/4. So you really get both out of him. That said, the +1 ability is not great. I think it does some things. It's kind of interesting, whether it's gaining some life or leaving it back to block, a token back to block and protect the Gideon. I think that's excellent. But it's overall not like a great plus ability. But luckily it's free because you still get your indestructible 4/4 out of it. Where I do think this card is, why I do think this card is potentially viable, probably only as a one of, and again, maybe not in this deck because it doesn't make tokens, it doesn't quite go with it, but it can exile any non-land permanent. That is something that I value highly in Modern as a main deck answer to a lot of problematic permanents, whether it's problematic enchantments or artifacts, specifically Rest in Peace, or not Rest in Peace, Ensnaring Bridge. So having a main deck answer to something like an Ensnaring Bridge, I think is great. Now, obviously, this won't be until turn 5, and then turn 7 if you want to keep the Gideon alive. But I'm sorry, turn 6. So let's see. +1 goes to 5 loyalty. Turn 4 goes to 6 loyalty. Turn 5 goes to 7 loyalty, and then turn 6 you would minus exile non-land permanent, and then still have your Gideon alive with 1 loyalty, and you can attack with the Gideon that turn. So it's very, very slow, but for a card that you might potentially play anyway in this Gideon, just as an indestructible 4/4, that eventually ticks up and gives you a Vindicate, basically. I think that's potentially viable. And like I said, maybe not in this deck, but in some black-white mid-range type deck, it might be a player. Who knows? Maybe blue-white control or something like that will end up playing it as a finisher. So, kind of hard because those decks don't use the +1 very well. But anyway, I think it's any threat that can also be an answer is just something that I value highly in Modern specifically. So keep an eye on Gideon. I think it could potentially be a playable card in the future. One of the other cards we're looking at is Finale of Glory. It's a token maker, so it's going to get talked about. It's something we're going to play. And I think this one's worth testing out. I think initial impression, just looking at it, I don't think it's good enough. I think we have better options. I think something like Secure the Waste is just better, just due to some versatility issues. But I do think it's pretty strong, right? Obviously, 1 token for 3 mana, that's bad. But again, if you're really in a pinch and you really have, if you only have 4 drops or answers that you can't use and you just need to get a threat on the board, and maybe you already have a Virtue out, or maybe you already have a Sorin out or something like that, you're kind of making a 3/3 or a 3/2 or a 4/3 or whatever it is. Notable, it is a soldier and not a knight, so it doesn't quite work with History of Benalia. But anyway, the 1 token's not so good. 2 tokens for 4 mana is very medium, pretty bad. It's a playable card in Standard probably, but still not great. 4 mana, we're expecting a little bit more. Now at 5 mana is when it gets interesting. So I think I would be very interested in paying 5 mana for 3 2/2s in our deck. Obviously, 5 mana for 3 2/2s can easily become 3 3/3s with a Virtue, or 3 2s with a Sorin, or something like that. Our deck uses these tokens, and that's really good. And just having like an Army in a Can type card, I think is very important. And obviously for 6 mana, you can get 4 2/2s, and that's phenomenal. But obviously, if you're talking 6 mana, you could be talking like Elspeth 6 and that kind of thing. at 4 mana, it's medium, probably not definitely not good enough, but certainly playable and something that will help us. And at 5 mana, I think it's actively good. So I think just having that versatility is what this is worth, right? Being able to play it as a 3-drop, 4-drop, or 5-drop, or 6-drop, and have it scale up that way, I think is potentially worth including. Certainly worth testing, even though at no rate is it actually good until you're getting to, 6, 7, or 8. But that's not happening in Modern. So it's a token maker. I figured we'd try it out and see where that led us. The last card from War of the Spark that I am testing out that I actually think is going to make a huge impact in Modern is Blast Zone. This card impressed me when I saw it, and I think our deck is one that can take advantage and play it, but I mostly think this is going to be just a huge player in Modern in general. Things like Amulet Titan and Tron, and a lot of decks that are going to have some pretty good versatility here. So obviously Engineered Explosives, great card in Modern, one of the most expensive rares in Modern, usually just because anyone can play it. And now here you're really adding anyone, because colorless decks can play it as well, and have that same effect. So for us, I think it's just another utility land. One of the strengths of playing a 2-color deck in Modern is that you should be able to utilize your utility lands, because you're not having to worry too much about color requirements. Obviously, we have some expensive cards in Auriok Champion and Spectral Procession and Lilianas and History Benalias and all that stuff. But so our mana is a little demanding, but certainly not more than some of the other decks that are running similar color sources as us. So I'm testing out a Blast Zone. I could see going up with it. I could see cutting it all together. But I do think it's a really interesting one and as I was talking about with Gideon, just having main deck answers to problematic permanents is something that I personally value very highly. So whether or not this is that important in our deck, I do feel like this is going to be a pretty commonplace inclusion in the Modern format. So those are the new cards. The rest of the list is kind of my standard 12 1-drops, 4/2, 3/3 is kind of where I've landed on Inquisition, Thoughtseize, Path, and Push. 4 Virtues. We talked about 3 Bitter Blossoms and 2 Dreadhorde Invasions. Trying the Auriok Champions in the main deck right now. I think obviously with like 5 Bitter Blossom effects, I'm going to try to keep our life total a little bit high. And I do think right now that, format's been kind of all over the place, and I just don't want to be killed early. I don't know how I feel about main deck Auriok Champion. You guys have heard my views on that in the past, but I figured I'd just test it out for this video. 4 Souls, of course. 3 History of Benalia. I do like the history. I don't really want to go Spectral here, just because with Finale of Glory, Gideon, Herod Invasion, we're already doing a lot of ground creatures, so adding more ground creatures shouldn't make a big difference, as opposed to having Spectral Procession. We'll see, maybe that'll come back to bite me, but I think that's viable. I'm kind of counting Finale as a 4-drop, so what I did is I cut a Planeswalker. I usually go 3 Sorin, 1 Gideon, or 2 Sorin, 2 Gideon, but figured I'd cut this as another of the 4 mana cards, which obviously I'd rather be a 5 mana card if we can afford to, but just cut down the Planeswalkers a little bit, and with the Auriok Champions main deck, the Sorin life gain becomes a little less important. So onto the sideboard, also very similar to what I've done. 1 Rest in Peace I've liked, 3 Stonies, 2 Disenchants, 1 Settle the Wreckage, 3 Surgical Effects, 2 Surgical and 1 Extirpate. I moved Collector Brutalities out of the deck, so I wanted to just keep 1 in the sideboard at least. I do like this card a lot, but it kind of took the place of, or Auriok Champion kind of took its place, along with Liliana. So did free up some sideboard space. A lot of humans. We are post Mythic Championship in London. Humans had a great, phenomenal showing. There's a lot of reasons for that won't be the case on Magic Online. You guys can go into analysis for that, but there's a lot of reasons for why humans did well this past weekend. But even then, it's going to be on people's radars, and people are going to be playing it out again. It's also great against just, Jund and Death Shadow decks that are seeming to creep up a little bit, which is phenomenal for our deck. Still bad against Tron, but that's still there. And then also something that kills things in the ice against Phoenix decks. And then the Vanifair combo decks that are getting popular, or even just blue-white Devoted Company decks. Just a lot of decks out right now that are fairly popular that you really want just more quick kill spells. So I'm adding the 7th Fatal Push here. Similarly, Zealous Persecution, I think it's just a good card. I think it's worth playing right now in the current metagame. 1 Damping Sphere for Storm and Tron and whatnot. And then my staple Basilisk Collar. I'm adding this especially with all the ground creatures. Dreadhorde Invasions and Gideon and the other the Finale of Glory tokens and all that stuff. Figured this would be a good inclusion. So anyway, thank you very much for continuing to support the channel. One last thing I'm going to do, YouTube has kind of created this cool little way and made it easy for me to add polls. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a poll for after this video series, what kind of content you guys have enjoyed the most and what you guys want me to be doing in the future. Obviously Modern Horizons is coming out in about 6 weeks, and so that's something I'm going to be testing out. I'm certainly going to be testing out new cards from Modern Horizons in our deck, and I'll do a lot of that this summer. But until then, and even just looking forward, I want you guys to kind of let me know. Poll should pop up here on the side somewhere. Basically, I want to know if you guys are more interested in these kinds of decks where we videos where we just test out new cards. If you guys are just more enjoying and looking for just what I feel like is the most competitive current build based on the metagame and playing games through that. That'll also come with going back to those those weekly Modern Challenge events that I used to do a lot over a year ago. And I think I'm going to try to get back to those this summer and record those. And then also, if you guys enjoyed other Modern decks, for some of you who watched my Esper Death Shadow videos, I have a lot of Modern decks that I like testing out and I want to keep testing out. So if there's other decks that you guys would like to see, throw that in the poll. So, all right, kind of a long one today, sorry. But thank you guys for watching and hope you enjoy the video series.